Hello friends, hello professionals, and welcome to my channel, The Sea of Regulation. My name is Simone Martin, and my channel is dedicated to helping people understand financial services regulation, compliance issues, how it affects you in your personal life, and we're just here to have a discussion. And today I am going to be looking at the one thing you need to get right for your inspections to go well, at least from an amlcft perspective. But before I dive in, let me get my usual disclaimers out of the way. I am a financial services regulator. I am not a lawyer, and I'm not a professional advisor. The views on this channel are definitely all my own and do not represent the view of any regulatory authority or international standard setter. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive in. So on-site inspections, regulatory inspections, they come in a lot of forms. Thematic inspections. We have a lot of different inspections we can do in relation to financial services firms and the entities that we regulate, because not everyone we regulate is a financial services firm. But there is one thing that you could work on, get that right, and chances are your amlcft inspection will go pretty well. And what is that one thing? Well, let's see. That one thing are your files, your records. Like, that's the easiest thing, or so some people think. It actually has a cascading effect on a lot of different areas in amlcft supervision. So if you're a bank, the customer files for that savings account or loan or your commercial account. If you're a trust and corporate service provider, those records for that company you've incorporated or that has been continued into your firm, or that trust that you've established for a client seeking to, make sure that they manage their generational wealth. Or if you're an insurer and that insurance policy that you've underwritten for whether property and casualty or for an individual, a life annuity, something. The files that you maintain are the main thing that get you into trouble. And if you get it right, you could probably have a pretty decent inspection. Now, why are your files, your records, so critical in relation to an amlcft inspection? You see, the files actually show us whether you've been doing other things right. Here's what I mean. Risk assessments. For every customer that you have, every product that you offer, or service, or transaction that you engage in, you need to carry out a risk assessment. And when we look at your files, we get to see whether you've been doing that risk assessment. Whether you've just done one risk assessment when that customer came in 5 years ago and you haven't looked back since, and meanwhile that customer has been bringing in more money, or they've diversified their activities, or they've just done something different and you're not aware of that. We get to see whether you are doing your due diligence. So are you updating your due diligence? And updating due diligence does not mean getting a new passport copy. Passports for adults generally take 10 years to expire. And if I've given my passport copy for a passport that was issued in 2018, guess what? Asking me for that same document in another 2 years or 3 years or 4 years does what for your due diligence? Again, this is something we look at to see whether your applied compliance even makes sense. The passport doesn't change unless you have something extreme happen, like, I don't know, gender reassignment. We live in an interesting world. But your actual due diligence efforts need to drill down and go at anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism, and there's the proliferation financing. But more importantly, what you do actually needs to translate to mitigating risks. And in a lot of cases, when we look at the files, it's clear that you don't understand what you're doing. Well, I shouldn't say it's clear. In some cases, it's clear. In other cases, we have to ask ourselves a lot of questions as to what it is this firm is doing to make sure that they're compliant in real life, because compliance hits real life. And again, getting an updated passport copy or even a driver's license, what is that going to do? I've lost weight, my face has changed a little bit, but essentially I'm still me. You've identified me, you've verified it's me, but what does that do for your due diligence? You need to be actually looking at your systems and drilling down as to what should go on that file to demonstrate that you have updated due diligence. If it is that I'm in a business, I run a bakery, have I expanded that bakery? Am I delivering to hotels and schools? So should your transaction monitoring profile change? Do I have a trade license? These are things that you would need to really consider in terms of updating your files. And I'm giving some very basic examples, but they're more complex examples that demonstrate to regulators often that people sometimes are not sure as to what to do. So again, your files. What else can go wrong with us looking at your files? Record retention. Now, this is a touchy topic. You see, when you have a client, you will maintain that file forever. And if it is that client decides, you know what, I am going to carry my bank account or this company or whatever I have to another service provider, some people feel that, well, that's the end of the business, I can destroy the records. No. In every jurisdiction on the planet, with maybe the exception of 2 that are sanctioned countries or something, you are required to retain your records for a period of time based on the risk of that particular customer. And if it is that that particular customer was the subject of an investigation, which you've not tipped off, you've not told them that, then the record retention requirement doesn't apply. You keep that indefinitely because there may be an ongoing investigation and sometimes those take years. So do you know how long you're supposed to retain your records? Now, as it relates to dormant accounts and companies that are struck from their registers for non-payment of fees, some service providers think, well, I've not seen them in a few years. I'm just going to file this in the archive and then I'll destroy it after the statutory period. Guess what? No, that's not the correct approach. What happens is that you actually need to take some positive action to terminate the relationship. So in the first example, the client leaves and you have a cutoff, you have an event at which you can start your countdown for how long you keep your records. But if it is that things just go dark, that doesn't mean that there isn't somebody at home. You need to retain those records and you need to make a decision in terms of what you do. Now, it seems to be getting a bit off topic, but not really. We're still looking at your files and how you deal with them. And that is one of the important things that we see. And then how are you keeping your files? We've seen electronic files, we've seen paper files. And regardless as to whether you go analog or digital, those need to be secure. So we don't want to see for the analog, the paper files, we don't want to see documents scattered all about. The worst thing that could happen when we are reviewing your files, we're looking at file for client A and we see records for client B, C, and D in that one file. What does that mean? Your record keeping isn't up to scratch. And if it is that we're finding things in a file that we're reviewing that should not be there, that is a problem. It says to us your record keeping practices are weak. Electronically, you'd think that electronic records would not have the same issues, but I can tell you, there's an issue of data integrity. So you had paper records, you're scanning those records to a digital format because, you know, you've been in business for some time. So that passport that you've scanned and you've asked for a copy of it like 2 or 3 or 14 times for your updating of due diligence, you're not even auditing your processes for digitizing the records to see whether the scanned copy is legible. And sometimes we have flatbed scanners where you lay the document flat. Who's checking to make sure that something hasn't been cut off in relation to that scanned document? And then when you scan the document, how are you labeling it? Does the label that's attached, so the file name, I'm saying labels, but does the label that's attached actually match what the document is? Does it aid you to find the information? Is it linked to the client? Sometimes, again, regulators go in, we conduct inspections, we look at the records, and it's absolute chaos. And then there are instances where we are told, well, everything has been electronic, and you go in and you start to carry out this inspection only to be told that, well, we've realized that some of the records that we thought would have been on our electronic system are not there, so we're printing them off for you so that you can see them, or we're copying them and we're going to send them. That's also a problem. What are you doing with your records? How are you keeping your files? Why is there so much chaos? These are the questions that regulators ask when we're looking at files. And then the files also help us determine whether you have a sanctions policy. and not to sanction your clients, but that you're looking out for international sanctions against persons and persons coming from certain countries and companies, and even virtual wallets now, virtual addresses are being sanctioned. We're checking to see whether you're applying, or if you have one, you're applying sanctions controls to make sure that your business is not being used to breach an international sanction. And in some jurisdictions, this is more important than others. I can tell you in the jurisdictions I am familiar with, they are incredibly important. So beyond sanctions, what else does the file tell us when we are inspecting? It gives us some insight as to how good your training is. Because if the applied compliance doesn't match what you've said in that compliance manual, which you've said to us you've trained staff on, you have a problem, and we're not calling Houston. You just really have a problem with your regulator. So the file review is arguably one of the most important components of an inspection, and it's one of the areas that has a lot of cascading effects onto other areas that regulators assess for AML-CFT compliance. And I'm not even talking about things like economic substance and all of the other discussion points that come up around taxation and base asset price erosion. We're not even looking at that. I'm just focusing on AML-CFT, but how you keep your files can mean the difference between compliance and, you know, a nice little letter from your regulator, or non-compliance and enforcement action. And in the most egregious cases, it really is painful. And I'm not talking about penalties. I'm not talking about administrative fines. I'm talking about revocation. Because if a regulator goes in and sees that this is some fresh, then we might take the nuclear option. And no, I'm not talking about proliferation financing. I mean revocation of the license. And by itself, a file review wouldn't trigger that. But again, it might be symptomatic of something that is more serious. So if you have any questions in relation to this, or comments from your experience being subject to an on-site inspection, or just comments in general based on where you see things are going in your jurisdiction, definitely drop it in the comments below. I'd be interested in hearing from you, because I could go on and talk about inspections all day. There are a lot of things you see when you go out and you do an inspection. And it's not just the regulators inspecting companies, because regulators are inspected too. And I've been on both sides of the divide. So I guess I have a unique experience in terms of what you look at from a macro and micro level. And I'll be happy to share that with you. Let me know if you want me to touch on some more topics. Definitely, you know what to do. Comment below. But I'll wrap it up there. And if it is that you found this helpful, share with 5 of your friends. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't. Hit the notification bell so that whenever something comes out on this channel, you're the first to know. And I definitely want you to give me a like, a thumbs up, because it helps the YouTube algorithm. You know, that's a nebulous thing. We're not sure how it works, but they tell us that hitting the like button helps. So please do that. And until my next installment, guys, I will end it here, and I'll see you on the next one.